Marcus Chen stepped off the transport shuttle, his military-issued boots making contact with Earth's soil for the first time in 8 months. The 17-year-old adjusted the strap of his gear bag and looked around at the familiar suburban landscape of his hometown. Everything looked the same: the neat rows of houses, the carefully maintained lawns, the old oak trees lining Maple Street. But Marcus was different now. His reflection in the shuttle's window showed the changes. Where once stood a skinny teenager who got picked on for being too short, now stood a young man with broader shoulders, calloused hands, and eyes that had seen too much. The Galactic Defense Corps had turned him into something he never expected to become: a soldier. Marcus had been one of the youngest humans ever recruited for the Emergency Defense Initiative. When the Zephyrian Empire had launched their surprise attack on the outer colonies, Earth's military had been desperate. They needed every able body, even teenagers who showed exceptional aptitude in combat simulations. Marcus had been playing video games in his bedroom when the recruiters knocked on his door. 3 days later, he was aboard a starship heading to the front lines of an interstellar war. The war had lasted exactly 7 months and 15 days. The humans had won, but barely. Marcus had been part of the strike team that disabled the Zephyrian flagship, earning himself a chest full of medals and the respect of seasoned veterans twice his age. More importantly, he had learned what humans could do when pushed to their limits. The galaxy had underestimated humanity's capacity for both ingenuity and ruthlessness. Now, walking toward Westfield High School, Marcus tried to shake off the weight of those memories. He wanted to be normal again. He wanted to worry about algebra tests and asking Sarah Mitchell to the winter dance. He wanted to pretend that he had never seen a Zephyrian war machine tear through a colony ship like paper. The school building came into view, and Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. Something was wrong. The building looked normal enough from the outside: the same red brick walls, the same glass entrance doors, the same poorly maintained parking lot. But there was something in the air, a tension that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. His combat instincts, honed over months of warfare, were screaming warnings. Marcus approached the main entrance cautiously. The first thing he noticed was the smell. It was subtle, but unmistakable to someone who had spent months on alien worlds: the metallic scent of ozone mixed with something organic and wrong. It reminded him of the Zephyrian bioweapons laboratories he had helped destroy on Kepler 442b. The second thing he noticed was the silence. It was 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. The hallways should have been filled with the usual chaos of teenagers getting to class. Instead, there was only an eerie quiet, broken occasionally by distant sounds that Marcus couldn't quite identify. He pushed through the entrance doors and stepped into the main hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently. The walls were covered with the usual collection of school posters and announcements, but something about them looked off. The colors were too bright, too vivid, as if they were glowing from within. Marcus walked slowly down the hallway, his hand instinctively moving to where his sidearm would have been. He had to remind himself that he was in a high school, not a war zone, but every instinct he had developed over the past 8 months was telling him otherwise. The first classroom he passed was his old homeroom. Through the small window in the door, he could see students sitting at their desks. They were perfectly still, facing forward with their hands folded. Too still. Marcus had never seen teenagers sit that quietly, not even during a lockdown drill. He tried the door handle. It was locked. "Marcus Chen," a voice said behind him. Marcus spun around, his body automatically dropping into a combat stance before his brain caught up. Standing in the hallway was Principal Hawthorne, the same middle-aged man who had suspended Marcus twice for fighting in his freshman year. But there was something different about him now. His eyes were too bright, reflecting light like an animal's eyes in the dark. "Welcome back," Principal Hawthorne continued, his voice carrying an odd echo. We've been waiting for you." "Waiting for me?" Marcus straightened up, but kept his muscles tensed. "I just got back from deployment. I was going to register for classes." "Oh, but you're already registered." Principal Hawthorne smiled, and Marcus noticed that his teeth seemed sharper than they should be. "Room 237, Advanced Placement Biology. Dr. Vance is expecting you." Marcus had never been in AP Biology. He had barely passed regular biology before he left for the war, but something told him not to argue with Principal Hawthorne. At least not here, not in the open hallway where anyone could be watching. "Sure," Marcus said carefully. "Where is room 237 again?" "Second floor, East Wing. You remember the way, don't you, Marcus? After all, you've always been such a bright boy. So much potential." The way Principal Hawthorne said potential made Marcus's skin crawl. It reminded him of how the Zephyrian interrogators had spoken about human capabilities, like they were discussing a particularly interesting specimen. Marcus nodded and headed toward the stairs. As he climbed to the second floor, he noticed that his footsteps seemed to echo longer than they should. The stairwell felt stretched, as if it were longer than it had been when he was a student here. The second-floor hallway was empty except for a few students walking in perfect synchronization toward their classrooms. They moved like they were sleepwalking, their eyes focused on some distant point. None of them acknowledged Marcus as he passed. Room 237 was at the end of the East Wing. Marcus had been in this hallway countless times before, but he had no memory of room 237. In fact, he was pretty sure that this section of the school had always ended at room 235. The door to room 237 was different from the others. Where the other classroom doors were painted institutional beige, this one was a deep black that seemed to absorb light. There was no window, just a small nameplate that read, "Dr. Vance, Advanced Biology." Marcus knocked on the door. "Enter," came a voice from within. Marcus opened the door and stepped inside. The classroom was larger than any classroom he remembered from his time at Westfield High. The ceiling stretched up into shadows, and the walls were lined with glass cases containing specimens that definitely weren't part of any high school biology curriculum. He saw what looked like organs floating in green liquid, skeletal structures that belonged to no earthly creature, and things that pulsed with their own inner light. At the front of the classroom stood Dr. Vance. Marcus had never seen him before, which was strange because he thought he knew all the teachers at Westfield. Dr. Vance was tall and thin, with pale skin and white hair that seemed to move in a breeze that wasn't there. His lab coat was pristine white, but there were stains on it that looked suspiciously like blood. "Ah, Marcus," Dr. Vance said, turning to face him. His eyes were completely black. "The young soldier returns. Please take a seat." Marcus looked around the classroom. There were about 20 students sitting at lab tables, all of them staring straight ahead, with the same glassy-eyed expression he had seen in the hallway. None of them moved or acknowledged his presence. "What kind of biology class is this?" Marcus asked, remaining standing near the door. Dr. Vance smiled, revealing teeth that were definitely too sharp. "We're studying adaptation, Marcus. How organisms change when faced with new environments. How they evolve to survive in hostile conditions. It's fascinating, really. Humans are particularly interesting subjects." "Subjects? Oh, yes. Humans have such remarkable adaptability. Take yourself, for example. 8 months ago, you were a weak, frightened child. Now look at you. The war changed you, didn't it? Made you stronger, faster, more aware? The Zephyrians did us quite a favor, actually." Marcus's blood ran cold. "How do you know about the Zephyrians?" Dr. Vance chuckled, a sound like breaking glass. "My dear boy, who do you think suggested that Earth recruit its children for the war? Who do you think has been watching, waiting, studying? The Zephyrians were never the real threat. They were simply a test." The students in the classroom suddenly turned to look at Marcus in unison, their movements mechanical and precise. Their eyes were the same black, as Dr. Vance's. "A test for what?" Marcus demanded. "To see what humans could become under pressure, to see how far you could be pushed, how much you could change while still remaining human." The results were quite promising. Marcus backed toward the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. The sound echoed through the impossibly large classroom like a gunshot. "The Zephyrian War created a generation of enhanced humans," Dr. Vance continued, walking slowly toward Marcus. "Stronger, smarter, more ruthless than your species has ever produced. And now it's time for the next phase of the experiment." "What experiment?" "The integration phase. We need to see how well these enhanced humans can adapt to a more controlled environment. Your high school seemed like the perfect testing ground." Marcus looked around the classroom again, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't his high school. This was some kind of laboratory, and he was the newest test subject. But Marcus Chen was no longer the frightened teenager who had left Earth 8 months ago. He was a soldier who had faced impossible odds and survived. He had learned to think quickly, fight dirty, and never give up. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "We are the architects," Dr. Vance replied. "We seed galaxies with life, then guide its evolution. We've been watching your species for millennia, waiting for the right moment to begin direct intervention. The Zephyrian conflict provided that opportunity. And if I refuse to be part of your experiment?" Dr. Vance's smile widened impossibly. "Oh, but you've already agreed. The moment you walked through those doors, you became part of the study. The only question now is whether you'll adapt quickly enough to survive." The students in the classroom began to stand up in unison, their movements still perfectly synchronized. Marcus noticed that their fingernails had grown into claws, and their teeth had sharpened into fangs. They were still recognizably human, but changed, evolved into something predatory. "Don't worry," Dr. Vance said. "The transformation is usually quick, a few hours at most. By tomorrow, you'll be just like them, enhanced, obedient, perfect." Marcus felt a tingling sensation in his hands and looked down to see that his own fingernails were beginning to grow longer. Whatever process had changed, the other students was already starting in him. But Marcus had learned something important during the war. He had learned that humans didn't just adapt to survive, they adapted to fight back. "There's one thing you didn't account for," Marcus said, flexing his hands as his nails continued to grow. "And what's that?" "Humans don't just evolve, we improvise." Marcus grabbed one of the glass specimen cases and hurled it at the nearest window. The glass shattered, letting in bright sunlight that made Dr. Vance and the transformed students recoil and hiss. In that moment of confusion, Marcus dove through the broken window. He hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact just as he had been trained. His gear bag had cushioned some of the fall, and his enhanced reflexes kept him from breaking anything important. Marcus picked himself up and ran. Behind him, he could hear inhuman screams of rage echoing from the classroom window. He needed to find a way to contact the outside world, to warn people about what had happened to Westfield High School. But as he ran through the seemingly normal suburban streets, Marcus began to notice other signs that something was wrong. House windows had curtains drawn tight in the middle of the day. There were no cars moving on the roads, no people walking on the sidewalks. The whole town felt empty, abandoned. Marcus pulled out his military-issue communicator and tried to contact Galactic Defense Command. Static filled the channel. He tried local emergency services. More static. Whatever the architects had done to the school, they had extended it to the entire town. He was on his own. Marcus found shelter in an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of town. As he caught his breath and planned his next move, he looked at his hands. The nail growth had stopped when he got away from the school, but they were still longer and sharper than normal. Whatever transformation process the architects had started was still working in him, just more slowly. He had maybe a day before the change became irreversible. a day to figure out how to fight back against an enemy that could transform an entire school into their laboratory. But Marcus Chen had faced impossible odds before. He had helped defeat an empire that thought humans were nothing more than primitive savages. Now he was going to show these architects what humans could really do when their backs were against the wall. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new battlefield. And this time, Marcus was fighting for more than just humanity's survival. He was fighting for humanity's soul. Marcus spent the first hour in the abandoned gas station methodically checking his gear and planning his approach. His military training had taught him that rushing into a situation without intelligence was the quickest way to get killed. He needed to understand what he was facing before he could fight it. From his gear bag, he pulled out a portable scanner that could detect various forms of energy and biological signatures. It was standard equipment for soldiers deployed to unknown worlds. Marcus had used it dozens of times during the war to identify Zephyrian technology and biological weapons. The readings he got from scanning toward the school made his stomach turn. The entire building was saturated with an energy signature he had never seen before, something that pulsed with an organic rhythm but had the complexity of advanced technology. It was as if the school had become a living machine. More disturbing were the human signatures. Marcus counted at least 300 people inside the school building, but their biological readings were all wrong. Their brain activity was synchronized, pulsing in perfect harmony like they were all connected to the same network. Their physical signatures showed elevated adrenaline, increased muscle density, and other changes that suggested rapid biological enhancement. The transformation wasn't random. It was controlled and purposeful. Marcus set up his equipment in the gas station's back office and began trying to hack into the town's communication networks. His time with the military had taught him more than just combat skills. He had learned electronic warfare, infiltration techniques, and how to gather intelligence behind enemy lines. What he found in the local networks chilled him to the bone. The architects had been here for months, maybe longer. They had slowly replaced key figures in the town, the mayor, police chief, school board members, even some parents. The real people had vanished, replaced by beings that looked human but registered as something else entirely on deep biological scans. They had been preparing for Marcus's return specifically. Files in the school's computer system contained detailed profiles of every human who had served in the Zephyrian War. But Marcus's file was marked as Priority Subject, Enhanced Adaptability Confirmed. They knew exactly what the war had done to him, and they wanted to study those changes. But the architects had made one crucial mistake. They thought they understood human enhancement because they had observed it from a distance. They didn't realize that human evolution wasn't just about physical changes. It was about learning to think differently, to adapt not just biologically but culturally and tactically. Marcus began to formulate a plan. He spent the next few hours moving through the abandoned parts of town, avoiding the areas where his scanner detected architect activity. He found other survivors, people who had hidden when the transformation began, who had somehow avoided being taken to the school. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the local hardware store, had barricaded herself in her basement when she noticed that her neighbors had stopped acting normally. Jim Morrison, a veteran from the Afghan conflict, had grabbed his hunting gear and fled to the woods when he recognized the signs of an occupation. Sarah Chen, Marcus's own little sister, had been hidden by their parents in the old bomb shelter their grandfather had built during the Cold War. Each survivor had a piece of the puzzle. Mrs. Patterson had seen strange vehicles arriving at the school in the middle of the night. Jim had observed architect patrols that moved with inhuman coordination. Sarah had overheard their parents talking about Marcus's return before they had been taken. But most importantly, they all confirmed that the transformation only worked on people who entered certain buildings that the architects had modified, primarily the school, but also the town hall, the police station, and the hospital. People who stayed away from these locations remained human. Marcus realized that the architects needed their subjects to willingly enter their processing centers. They couldn't just grab people off the streets. The transformation required the subject to be in a specific environment surrounded by their technology. This gave Marcus an idea. That evening, as darkness fell over the town, Marcus prepared for his counterattack. He had spent the afternoon rigging explosives using materials from Mrs. Patterson's hardware store. His military training had included demolitions, and he knew how to bring down a building without harming the people inside. But his primary weapon wouldn't be explosives, it would be information. Marcus had discovered that the architect network relied on quantum communication arrays hidden throughout the modified buildings. These arrays allowed them to coordinate the transformation process and maintain control over their subjects. But quantum communication had a weakness. It could be disrupted by specific electromagnetic frequencies. During the war, humans had learned to jam Zephyrian communication systems by exploiting similar vulnerabilities. The architects might be more advanced than the Zephyrians, but they apparently hadn't learned from that conflict. Marcus approached the school under cover of darkness, carrying a modified military communicator that could broadcast on the frequencies needed to disrupt the quantum arrays. He had only one shot at this. Once the architects realized what he was doing, they would adapt their systems. But Marcus wasn't planning to just disrupt their communications. He was planning to turn their own network against them. He slipped into the school through the same window he had escaped from earlier. The building felt different at night. The walls seemed to pulse with an organic rhythm, and the air was thick with that metallic smell he had noticed earlier. Marcus made his way through the darkened hallways, following his scanner toward the strongest concentration of architect technology. He found it in the basement, in what had once been the school's boiler room. The room had been transformed into something that belonged on an alien starship. Walls covered with organic-looking technology pulsed with bioluminescent light. Cables that looked more like veins connected various devices to a central processing unit that throbbed like a giant heart. At the center of it all was a communication array that matched the quantum technology Marcus had encountered during the war. But this one was far more sophisticated, designed not just for communication but for biological control. Marcus set up his equipment and began the process of hacking into the architect network. It took several attempts. Their security was formidable, but eventually he found a way in. The architects had made the mistake of assuming that humans couldn't understand their technology well enough to exploit it. They were wrong. Once inside the network, Marcus could see the full scope of the architect operation. It wasn't just his town. There were similar facilities in dozens of locations around the world, all connected through the quantum communication system. They were conducting a massive experiment on human enhancement, using the veterans of the Zephyrian War as their primary test subjects. But Marcus also discovered something the architects hadn't expected. The enhanced humans weren't just passively accepting the transformation, they were fighting it. At a subconscious level, their military training was allowing them to resist the mental conditioning. They were still trapped in their modified bodies, but their minds were struggling to break free. Marcus smiled grimly. He had found his angle of attack. He began uploading a signal into the architect network, not random noise or a simple jamming frequency, but a carefully crafted pattern based on military drill commands and emergency codes. It was information that would be meaningless to the architects, but would trigger specific responses in anyone with military training. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the school, the transformed students began to convulse as their enhanced nervous systems processed the military signals. Their conditioning wavered as deeply ingrained training protocols overrode the architect mental control. In the basement, alarms began blaring as the architect technology registered the disruption. Marcus heard footsteps rushing toward his location, Dr. Vance and other architect operatives responding to the breach. But Marcus wasn't finished. He activated the second part of his plan, uploading a virus into the network that would carry the disruption signal to every connected facility around the world. If it worked, every enhanced human under architect control would receive the same wake-up call. Dr. Vance burst into the basement just as Marcus triggered the final stage of his assault. The teenager drew his combat knife and spun to face the architect operative, no longer the confused student who had walked into room 237 that morning. "Impossible," Dr. Vance snarled, his human disguise falling away to reveal something that was definitely not from Earth. His skin took on a crystalline quality, and his eyes blazed with an inner fire. "You should have been fully converted hours ago." "You made one mistake," Marcus said, circling warily as more architect operatives filed into the room. "You assumed that human enhancement was just about biology. You didn't account for what war teaches us." "And what is that?" Dr. Vance demanded. "That the strongest weapon humans have isn't our bodies or our technology. It's our refusal to give up." The fight that followed was unlike anything Marcus had experienced during the war. The architects moved with inhuman speed and coordination, their crystalline skin deflecting most attacks. But Marcus had advantages they didn't expect. His enhanced reflexes from the transformation process, combined with combat skills honed against opponents who had also seemed impossible to defeat. More importantly, he wasn't fighting alone. Throughout the school, enhanced students were beginning to break free of their conditioning as the military signals continued to pulse through the network. They might not remember who they were yet, but they remembered how to fight. Marcus could hear the sounds of combat spreading through the building as students battled their architect handlers. His virus was working, not just locally but around the world. Through the quantum network, he could sense similar uprisings beginning in other facilities. The architects had made a fatal error. They had tried to use humanity's greatest strength, its adaptability, as a weakness. But humans didn't just adapt to survive. They adapted to overcome. Dr. Vance lunged at Marcus with claws that could cut through steel, but Marcus was no longer where he had been a split second before. 8 months of combat had taught him to move like water, to be where his enemies didn't expect. His combat knife found a gap in Dr. Vance's crystalline armor, and the architect operative screamed in a voice that shattered the glass specimen cases around the room. Green fluid leaked from the wound, and Dr. Vance staggered backward. "This isn't over," Dr. Vance hissed. "We have been seeding worlds for millions of years. One setback will not stop us." "Maybe not," Marcus agreed, pressing his attack. "But it'll stop you." The knife struck home again, and Dr. Vance collapsed. Around the basement, other architect operatives were falling back as more enhanced humans broke free and joined the fight. But Marcus knew the real battle was just beginning. The architects had facilities around the world, and they wouldn't give up easily. They would adapt their tactics, learn from this failure, and try again. But they had taught humanity something valuable in the process. They had shown humans what they could become when pushed to their limits, how they could change and grow while still remaining fundamentally human. The enhanced humans who survived this night would be different from what they had been before. Stronger, faster, more capable than baseline humans, but still retaining the core characteristics that made humanity dangerous: creativity, stubbornness, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. As the sounds of fighting began to die down throughout the school, Marcus realized that the architects had succeeded in creating something they hadn't intended, a new generation of humans who were enhanced not just physically, but mentally and tactically as well. The galaxy was about to discover that the species that had defeated the Zephyrians in 7 months had just evolved again, and this time, humanity would be ready for whatever came next. Dawn broke over Westfield High School to reveal a scene that would have been impossible to imagine just 24 hours earlier. The building still stood, but it was clearly no longer the same structure Marcus had attended before the war. Parts of the exterior walls showed the organic crystalline growths that marked architect technology, while other sections had been damaged in the night's fighting. Marcus stood in the main hallway, surrounded by dozens of teenagers who had been transformed by the architect process, but were now free of their mental conditioning. They looked human enough, but Marcus could see the changes, the enhanced musculature, the sharper features, the eyes that reflected light just a little too brightly. They were still recognizably his former classmates, but they had become something more. "How many facilities have we lost contact with?" Marcus asked Sarah Kim, a senior who had been in the robotics club before the architects took her. She had adapted quickly to her enhanced mental processing power and was now coordinating communications with other sites around the world. 17 confirmed liberated, Sarah reported, her voice carrying a slight harmonic undertone that was one of the side effects of the transformation. 8 more showing signs of successful uprising. The architects are falling back from at least 30 locations. Marcus nodded, but he knew better than to celebrate yet. The architects had been manipulating galactic civilizations for millions of years. They wouldn't be defeated by a single night of fighting, no matter how successful it had been. "What about the adult conversion centers?" he asked. "Town hall, police station, and hospital are all secured," reported Jake Morrison, Jim's 17-year-old son who had been taken during the initial wave. "The enhanced adults are having a harder time breaking free of the conditioning, but they're getting there." That was expected. The architects had specifically targeted the teenage veterans of the Zephyrian War because adolescent brains were more adaptable. Adults who had been processed through the system were more thoroughly conditioned, but Marcus had faith that they would eventually break free. Human stubbornness was hard to overcome, even with advanced alien psychology. Marcus looked around at the faces of his enhanced classmates and felt a mixture of pride and concern. They had won this battle, but he could see that they were struggling with what they had become. These were teenagers who had gone to bed thinking about homework and dating, only to wake up as something beyond baseline human. "Listen up," Marcus called out, and the enhanced teens gathered around him. Their movements were too fluid, too coordinated, reminding him uncomfortably of how the conditioned students had moved before they broke free. But their eyes were alert and independent, showing the spark of individual thought that the architects had tried to suppress. "I know this is scary," Marcus began. "You didn't ask for any of this, but we need to talk about what happens next. Because the architects aren't going to give up. They're going to adapt their tactics and try again. Maybe we should just try to reverse the process," suggested Amy Williams, who had been the star of the debate team. "Find a way to change back to normal?" Marcus shook his head. "I've been studying the architect technology all night. The changes they made to us are permanent. More importantly, trying to reverse them might kill us. Our enhanced nervous systems are fully integrated now. Going backward isn't an option." "So we're stuck like this?" asked Derek Thompson, whose enhanced hearing was so acute that he kept wincing at normal speaking volumes. "Not stuck," Marcus corrected. "Evolved. The architects made a mistake when they enhanced us. They assumed that making us physically superior would make us easier to control. They didn't understand that human strength doesn't come from our bodies. It comes from our ability to work together and adapt to any situation." Sarah Kim looked up from her communication device. "Marcus, we're getting reports from the other liberated sites. The enhanced humans are organizing. They want to coordinate a response to prevent the architects from regrouping." Marcus felt a surge of pride. Even scattered across the globe, facing an impossible situation, humans were doing what they did best, forming alliances and preparing to fight back. "What kind of coordination?" he asked. "They want to form a network," Sarah explained. "Share intelligence, coordinate defensive measures, pool resources to understand the architect technology better. There's talk of forming a new branch of the Galactic Defense Corps specifically for enhanced humans." Marcus considered this. The political implications were staggering. Humanity had just experienced an involuntary evolutionary leap. The enhanced humans were no longer quite the same species as baseline humans, but they were still undeniably human in every way that mattered. "What does Earth's government think about all this?" he asked. "That's complicated," Sarah admitted. "The initial reports are causing panic in some quarters. There are people calling for the enhanced humans to be quarantined, studied, even detained. But there are also military leaders who see the potential for a new kind of super soldier." Marcus grimaced. He had expected that reaction. Humanity had a long history of fearing what it didn't understand, even when that fear was directed at its own people. "Any word from Galactic Defense Command?" "Admiral Torres wants to speak with you directly," Sarah said. "She's the one coordinating the military response to the architect threat." Marcus remembered Admiral Torres. She had been the one to approve his emergency deployment during the Zephyrian War, despite his age. If she was involved, it meant that the military was taking the architect threat seriously. "Patch me through," Marcus decided. Sarah made the connection, and Admiral Torres appeared as a holographic projection in the damaged hallway. The woman looked older and more tired than Marcus remembered, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Sergeant Chen," she said, and Marcus straightened instinctively. "I've been reading the reports from your operation. Impressive work." "Thank you, Admiral. But this is just the beginning. The architects have facilities throughout the galaxy. They've been manipulating civilizations for millions of years." "Agreed, which is why I'm authorizing the formation of Enhanced Human Operations Division. You and the other enhanced veterans will have full military backing to continue your investigation of architect activities." Marcus felt a wave of relief. The government wasn't going to treat them as threats to be contained. They were being recognized as assets in the fight against a larger enemy. "What about the enhanced civilians?" Marcus asked. "The students and adults who weren't military." "They'll be given the choice," Admiral Torres replied. "Full integration into the new division with training and support, or assistance in finding ways to live normal lives despite their enhancements. No one will be forced into military service." "And the baseline human population? How are they handling the news?" Admiral Torres sighed. "About as well as you'd expect. There's fear, confusion, some anger. But there's also recognition that you saved not just your own town, but potentially the entire human species. The enhanced humans are being hailed as heroes in most quarters." Over the next few hours, Marcus worked with his enhanced classmates to secure the remaining architect technology and prepare for the arrival of military specialists. The basement laboratory was a treasure trove of alien science that would take years to fully understand, but Marcus was more interested in the long-term implications. The enhanced humans weren't just physically superior. Their mental processing power was significantly increased as well. They could see patterns and connections that baseline humans missed, solve complex problems faster, and adapt to new situations with unprecedented speed. In trying to create a more controllable human subspecies, the architects had accidentally created something far more dangerous. Humans with enhanced capabilities who still retained their species' greatest strengths: creativity, determination, and the ability to work together against impossible odds. That afternoon, as military transports began arriving to evacuate the architect technology and debrief the enhanced civilians, Marcus found himself talking with Sarah Kim on the school's front steps. "Do you think we're still human?" she asked, flexing her hands and watching the muscles move with inhuman precision. "I think we're exactly what humans were always supposed to become," Marcus replied. "Just faster than anyone expected." "What do you mean?" Marcus gestured toward the arriving military vehicles, where enhanced and baseline humans were working together to secure the area. "Humans have always been defined by our ability to change, to adapt, to become whatever we need to become to survive. The architects tried to control that process, but they just accelerated it. And now, Now we have an entire galaxy to explore, and we're better equipped to handle whatever we find out there. The Zephyrians thought they were conquering a primitive species. The architects thought they were manipulating a controllable one. Both of them learned the same lesson. Which is? Marcus smiled, feeling the weight of his enhanced muscles and the clarity of his improved mind. Never underestimate a species that refuses to stay down. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the bridge of the UES Adaptation, the first starship crewed entirely by enhanced humans. They were heading to the Kepler system, where intelligence suggested the architects had a major research facility. The Enhanced Human Operations Division had grown to include over 10,000 individuals from around the world. They had become humanity's specialist forces for dealing with threats that normal humans couldn't handle, not because baseline humans were weak, but because some enemies required capabilities that only the enhanced could provide. The relationship between enhanced and baseline humans had stabilized into something that worked for both groups. Enhanced humans served as humanity's advanced scouts and specialist forces, while baseline humans provided the creativity and unpredictability that kept human culture vibrant and adaptive. Marcus had learned that the architects' greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating human adaptability. It had been misunderstanding what adaptation meant to humanity. They thought adaptation was about becoming something else. For humans, adaptation was about becoming more themselves. Contact on sensors, reported Enhanced Lieutenant Chen. Sarah Kim had taken his sister's last name when she enlisted. Architect facility detected, approximately 4 million kilometers ahead. Any defensive measures? Marcus asked. They're powering up some kind of energy field, but it doesn't look like anything we've seen before. Marcus smiled grimly. The architects were adapting, too, developing new weapons and defenses to counter human capabilities. But they were still making the same fundamental error. They thought this was a war that could be won through superior technology. They didn't understand that for humans, war wasn't about having better weapons than your enemy. It was about being willing to do whatever it took to protect what you valued. Take us in, Marcus ordered. Let's show them what enhanced humans can do when we put our minds to it. The UES Adaptation accelerated toward the Architect facility, carrying its crew of enhanced humans into what would be the next phase of humanity's evolution. Behind them, Earth continued its development as a civilization that had successfully integrated 2 variants of humanity into a single, stronger whole. The architects had intended to create servants. Instead, they had created something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that had consciously chosen to enhance itself while retaining its essential character. The galaxy was about to learn what that meant, and Marcus Chen, the teenager who had returned from one war only to find himself fighting another, was ready to teach them.